In this tutorial, we're going to see how constructors and destructors play an important role in inheritance. So I will take a real life example to show the working of constructor and destructor in inheritance. So let's suppose there is a building, and now what we want to do is we want to construct a building. So to construct a building, let's suppose this is ground. So if you want to construct a building, first you will construct the lowest floor, then you will construct another floor, and then it will go on like this. So let's suppose this is floor 1, this is floor 2, this is floor 3. So construction of this building will go like this. In case of destruction, let's suppose this building is already constructed, and now I want to destruct this building. So I cannot destruct it from the first floor. I will first destruct the building from the last floor, from the third floor. So first I will destruct this third floor, then I will move down to the second floor and I will destruct that, and then the last one. So this is destruction. So this similar concept applies in inheritance. Let's see how. So let's suppose that our first floor is the base class. So there is a base class, and then we are deriving classes from this base class. That means that we are going to create some floors on it. So if this is a base class, then we are deriving some of its features in the derived class. And to make this a multi-level inheritance, we can again create a derived class 2. So I can write here derived class 2. So in this way you can see that how we can derive classes from the previous, or you can say the base class. So let's study about constructors and destructors. So base class will have its own constructors, and the derived classes will also have their own set of constructors. And by set I mean that the constructor can be a default constructor or a parameterized constructor. So they all the derived classes and including the base class has their own constructors. So what we do is we create an object of derived class, and then we use this object to access the members of the base class. So we know that at the time of object creation, constructor is called. So the question is, when you will create an object of the derived class, which constructor will be called first? Which constructor will be called first? So if you're creating an object, let's suppose there is a base class B, or let's say there is a base class like this, and it has its own constructor. Let's suppose this is a default constructor and it has some lines in it. So let's suppose this is a base class, and now what we are going to do is we will derive another class. So let's say the name of the derived class is DC. So now what we'll do is we constructor of this derived class. Let's suppose this is a default constructor. Constructor for the base class. For base class. So whenever you will create an object of the derived class, it will first call the constructor of the base class. So it will call this constructor first. And this does make sense to this real world concept, because first you will have to construct the base class and then only you can move to the derived classes. So if you will call the if you will create an object of the derived class, it will call the constructor of the base class first. So the second question is what will be the order of calling destructors. So if the base class has a destructor also, so let's say the base class also has destructors and the derived class are also having the destructors. So how will the program call the destructors? What will be the order? So it is similar to this real world concept. It will first call the destructor of the derived class. So it will first call the destructor of the derived class. And it will move on calling the destructor for the next derived class, and at last it will just call the destructor of the base class. So this is the order of calling constructors and destructors by the program whenever you will create an object of the derived class. So there is a condition here, and that the base class constructors require arguments to construct their object. So sometimes the base class constructor sometimes the base class constructors require arguments to construct their objects. So in the previous case, you can see here that this is a default constructor. It does not accept any arguments, and it does not require arguments to construct object. So what will happen if the base class constructor is not a default constructor but a parameterized constructor? So if you will call the derived class object, if you will create an object of the derived class, we know that it will call the base class. But if it will call the base class constructor, then how will you give the values to the constructor here? So let me just create a constructor that actually takes some parameters. So let's suppose this is this is our base class constructor. So let's suppose this is the constructor of the base class, and when we will call when the of the derived class, this base class constructor will be called first according to this theory. So we need to give some values to this constructor so that it can just construct the object. So how will we give this to the at the time of object creation? So the way to do this is like this. First of all, you will write the derived class name, and when you are calling the constructor, you will just create two arguments. If it is taking two arguments here, you will write two arguments here in the derived class name constructor, and then you will use a colon, and then you will just write a base class name, and then you will just write the same parameters here. So this derived class constructor will get changed to this one. So now it will be not like this, it will look like this. So the derived class constructor will look like this. So whenever you will create the object of the derived class, it will call the constructor of the derived class first, which will further call the base class constructor, and it will give two values to this to the base constructor. So in this case, you can see here that derived, we have not written, this is a default derived constructor because it is giving the two values p and q to the base constructor only. So these two values are used to construct the base class, not the derived constructor. So if you want to create a parameterized derived constructor, you will have to add more values in this place. So you will have to modify it like this. The derived class constructor will have its own values, or you can say the parameters, and it will have two parameters to construct the base class constructor. So the values p and q. So the values p and q are used to construct the base class constructor. So it will call the base class constructor, and it will also give arguments to this. So these two arguments are reserved for the base class constructor, and these arguments are for the derived class constructor.